we talked a little bit about, we started to talk about the impact of culture on negotiations, and that is actually super, super important because there's different types of culture. If we had to describe a more conservative industry like banking, how would you describe them? I mean, versus telecom, for instance, the culture, I mean.
I would say maybe really strong hierarchy.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. The hierarchy is very important. They're all fighting with the lack of diversity because, you know, we know from many Deloitte studies that companies that have a more diverse team are more successful. So it's better for the bottom line of a business if the culture is such that it's open to different types of people. And I don't just mean men and women, of course, I mean that as well, but international people, people coming from different nations that have different experiences that they bring to the table. So this type of culture would be an open-minded culture. Basically, what I just wanted to also convey just in the few minutes that we have left is basically, you know, we said there's many types of culture, professional cultures, national cultures, but if we had to somehow find prototypes of culture, there is actually 3 prototypes that we can distinguish between. There is a dignity culture, a face culture, and an honor culture. And in a way, it's a little bit a distinction between East and West cultural prototypes, and some of them are actually grounded in Confucian philosophy, right? And when we look at the characteristics, we mentioned a few, the 8 dimensions by Erin Meyer. There's also the confrontation style, the trust, how do we form trust? What is the mindset of people? What is their power and status? Is it hierarchical? Is it non-hierarchical? The first one is actually the dignity culture. And I would say this is a prototype of Western cultures, yeah, where the emphasis is on the individual and the self-worth is driven by self-determined status, actually, right? You have that actually in egalitarian governments, you have it in market economics. And if you think about cultures that come to mind, we mentioned a few dignity cultures, I would say some Western cultures like Germany, France. And they have actually an intrinsic self-worth. They're not easily threatened. And there's a major focus actually on respect. Yeah, respect is super important. And when you remember the pumpkin story that we used in the first lesson, actually, and there were actually direct approaches being used by the author of our book, Brit, and remember there were these pumpkins. She was living in Mexico at the time, and the woman didn't want to sell the pumpkins, but in an integrative deal, she found out there would be a win-win because one person was just interested in the seeds, the other person was interested in the shell for a school project, and they found an agreement, an integrative agreement. And sometimes trust is reached through reciprocity. That means treat others as they treat you, because it somehow signals integrity and trustworthiness. Yeah. And in dignity cultures, people actually have an analytical mindset, yeah, and they break up problems into separate elements or separate issues, and then they prioritize, they rank the problems, yeah, and they always search for logical or linear rules. And that's also important when they work in a so-called with a document, actually. When we look at face cultures, it's the prototype of East Asian societies. right? I told you when I did negotiations with the Japanese, there's a huge emphasis on the interests of the collective, of the group, yeah? And the self-worth is somehow socially conferred. And the fundamental group for them is the family. It's all important. The family is all important. That's why in negotiations, it's so important that you try to get to know the other person. What are their interests? What is their family like? Do they like to play golf? What are their other interests? Do they have children? So try to get to know them. And this is very common in South Korea and Japan. So just to sum it up, when we take culture into account and how culture affects negotiations, there are maybe 3 takeaways for you from today's class. The basics: think about who are the parties and what are the issues. What are the priorities of the other party? What are the interests of the other party? And what is my alternative? What is my best alternative to this negotiated agreement? Do I have other options? What is my walkaway price? What are my reservation prices? What are my targets? And then really think about strategic behaviors. Where does your negotiating partner come from? But don't just pigeonhole him. Not all Chinese are like the Chinese. Maybe he studied in America and was influenced by that. And take the environment into account in which the negotiation occurs. Take the context into account. And then hopefully have your negotiating planning document at hand.